Welcome to Counterspin's ongoing series with Kenneth Scott of the House of Cousins, a peek into the matrix. Well, we've pretty much done a bit of a deep dive in some parts and skimming the surface of the others, but I'm sure this one is going to go even further and clarify a few things along the way. We've had a lot of questions about this series coming in, and a lot more interest has been piqued. People are starting to share it. The conversation has started, and people are starting to make a difference. And in fact, they're getting empowered now to stand against the system. So a few of those questions have come in. Like I said, we're about to ask Ken those, and he will, I'm sure, lay them to rest. Welcome to the show, Ken. 2022. I suspect the next few months is going to be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Right, we'll get right into it because people don't really like my waffling too much. So we'll start now. Okay, people get the concept, as we've spoken before, about going to peace. They're also clicking onto the various concepts like jurisdictions, capacity, standing, equity, etc. What they don't get is going to peace with a system that seems hell-bent on trying to kill them, i.e. the great scamdemic, the old Satan stab, jab, and experimental anti-Nuremberg trial carry-ons that they're taking against people. How do we reconcile that? How do we have a go to peace with the system on one hand, but yet turn a blind eye when they're out to kill us?
Very good. Well, let me set the record straight and first say there's been a big mistake, because last summer I was in Europe and I called everybody back home and I said, I'm going to Greece. And there was static on the line, and they said, he said he's going to peace. And I said, no, Greece. He says peace. And it just all started from there. So other than that, to answer the question, let's, as you and I were talking the other night in preparation for this call, I said a phrase, which I think is going to be a very important operative phrase for everybody to use, which is going to peace is not going to passivity. Okay. And ultimately, there are several layers and levels of going to peace. Okay. Has nothing to do with going to Greece, but Greece was very nice, actually. And we sailed around and enjoyed the waters. But it has to do with the entire whole system of where we find ourselves, how everything has been constructed. And as I set the tone 10 years ago when I first presented a seminar that's available on our YouTube and other channels called How It All Fits Together, that was based on 20 years of my research and delving deep into law and all the other things that we bring forward now in the integrated whole of our education and the things that we use to apply in real terms with that education, that everything is a whole system. You cannot take independent parts and separate them from the whole system. That includes the physical reality we're in, which includes physics, biology, chemistry, the natural order of things in this planetary world. It includes the social, economic, and legal systems. It includes the multidimensional and the esoteric, the symbology, and all the systems in esoterica. They are all integrated as a whole system. The danger and the dead-end path that many people take in trying to find solutions and real answers is they separate one piece that seems to be and appears to be a complete whole, like we were just talking before we started recording, which we'll get into later in this live call. You were talking about common law, and a lot of people are getting into common law. And if you only look at common law and don't understand how it fits into the larger whole, it it is not going to work. It's a misdirection and a misapplication without understanding the whole system of the entirety of where we are at. So at one level, going to peace, first and foremost, has to do with our own internal level of our own internal landscape, what is within us that is being reflected outside of us in the world system, and what that statement means, what the process going to peace means in terms of facing oneself, in terms of the things that we have to deal with internally in order to transmute and transform the component parts of our entire journey in this reality. And when I say the entire journey, that's not just this lifetime. It's the multiplicity of lifetimes and other levels of our presence here in this planetary realm, creational field, and the things that we brought into this lifetime and who we are in this moment, wherever we are in this lifetime. It's what we call inner work and dealing with the trauma, the karma, the drama, the relational issues that we have, all the things that have created separation within ourselves. So going to peace is applied as a directive for facing oneself, dealing with oneself, not seeing the external reality as the enemy, which I coined a long time ago as the enemy construct, which you and I have talked about before. And, I came up with that in my journey of over 30 years now of studying law and working with a lot of the original pioneers in this law movement, and who I worked with in the 90s and into the 2000s, watching many extremely intelligent people, quite brilliant and quite passionate about freedom and wanting to achieve it, but making the fatal flaw and mistake of seeing the outside reality as the enemy, whether it's the bankers, the politicians, the elite, the cabal, or what have you. And what you started as describing, those who are actively, obviously now trying to genocide a mass, high majority portion of humanity and causing, the kind of things that we're watching unfold today. Well, the fact is that they've been working to do what we see today for thousands of years. It has always been the case for the entirety of our lives, however long any one of us have been living on this planet, 30 years, 40, 50, 60 years or longer. Our entire lives have been immersed in a cult of death and a process in legal, economic, social, educational, all of that, monetary and banking, as a process to basically destroy us, to kill us. So it's not news today that they're doing what they're doing. It's always been the case. Now it's completely revealed, which is really what the purpose and the point of how they, the outside, they have been basically seduced into thinking that they had the power and the capacity to complete this task that they set out to do. So that's the enemy construct, projecting outside of ourselves that they are our enemy, that they have the power to do what they say they're going to do. But in fact, by going to peace, what it does, and I speak from direct experience of applying this to myself, and with many other people that we've worked with for years, that first of all, by taking full responsibility, which is another thing people have a problem with. You can't tell me I'm responsible for what these people are doing, or I'm responsible for, the genocide or the lies and all the rest of it. But it's not a matter of culpability. It's a matter of taking back our capacity as the true creator capacity, as the creators of this realm that we're in, because we have been under a state of amnesia. We've been entrained and directed to focus our creator capacity in creating this matrix within a hologram. And so taking responsibility really means re-empowering ourselves because when we see the outside as our enemy and going into futility and saying, well, if I go to peace and I'm going to be passive, I'm going to be a lamb led to slaughter, and they're just going to run over me and us, and they're going to achieve what they're setting out to do. But that's not what it's really about. It's about taking full responsibility that we are the creators, and that if we redirect our capacity to create, that what we're doing is we're withdrawing a very significant level of the energy that this system has fed off of for millennia to build this false narrative and this false hologram, this false reality, within which, in that narrative, they are all powerful. They have an all-seeing eye. They have all the money, all the medical facilities. They have the banks. They have the law enforcement, the military, and so forth. And we're withdrawing our consent first and going to peace within ourselves to face that which is split and separated within, and redirecting how we are directing our creator capacity into a new creation, basically. And we'll get into that in real terms, not metaphysical, airy-fairy terms, but real substance of what it means to do what I'm saying. As we do that, it's just like, I think I use this in one of our calls. If you've got a big hose with water and you're filling your next door neighbor's pond or lake with that water, then he's getting the benefit and your lake and your fields are going dry. If you take that hose and you redirect it to your own field and your own requirements to nourish the land and the plants and animals and yourself, then that takes away that flow from your neighbor. Not to say we want to do it to our actual neighbor, but metaphorically or as an analogy, we're taking away our energy direction from the matrix. And if you really step back and you don't take it personally, and all of you who are watching and listening to this, who are suffering with all the things that are going on, families breaking up, personal finances collapsing, losing jobs because you're standing and not consenting to the jab and all of that. And you stand back from that, the personal struggles you're having, and you look at what's happening objectively, what you see is the collapsing and imploding of the matrix and all those who are connected to it. They are actually going crazy, and they are showing themselves to who they are, and they're acting in more and more crazy ways that is so self-evident to more and more people. They're creating the basis of their own demise, and their behavior is directly related to the fact that the energetic support of what they have always depended on is reducing at an exponential pace.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Yeah, so that's the first step. Okay, that's why I said last time, the most important thing, especially in places that are really being pressed, like New Zealand and Austria and Australia and Canada and so forth, is to stand still, is to just hold still and allow yourself to see this, what I'm saying, objectively, and to know that, and we're going to get into this in functional detail during the course of this conversation. I'm going to describe how law and jurisdiction and the other things that you've said you want to talk about, law form and so forth, how they really work. Okay. So moving on from that internal point, internal focus of going to peace, when we really comprehensively understand how law, jurisdiction, and the entire world system has been structured, fundamentally it boils down to one element, which is that the system is a cult of death, and it's based on war. Principles of war, rules of war. It always struck me earlier on, before I really understood all of this in early years, when I started hearing things like about, the Geneva Convention and the Nuremberg trials and the Nuremberg principles and code and things like that, it always struck me as, isn't that sort of an oxymoron or just a complete disconnect to say that there are rules of war and we must follow those rules? What is war? It's like, two groups going out on a field and just killing each other.
Yep.
What more rules are there to be? Okay.
Some of the Geneva Convention and all that, you got to treat your prisoners well. You've got to kill them in humane ways. Right. Is that like what the difference between battery hens and free range chickens? You know what I mean? It's just, It makes no sense at all. And it's like, let's go to war to bring about peace. That concept alone also is an oxymoron.
It's all Orwellian, and those rules are nice, treating your prisoners of war humanely and things like that. Well, have they ever really done that? No. If you look at the history of war in the last 150 years since these rules were being implemented, no, they haven't really followed that. But what they have done is created a construct of war and the rules thereof that are applicable throughout the world system. And understanding that commerce, as it's defined and precisely set up by the code and the rules of Uniform Commercial Code and all the things that control securities and the money and banking system and all the rest of that, to understand that this is a field of battle within the rules of war. And this is a matter of the rules of war were not set up as to really what are the rules relative to when there's two armies on the battlefield, especially when we went into the nuclear age. It's like, okay, we'll kill you humanely by sending, a couple hundred nuclear devices into your cities. And
we'll make it quick. We'll make you go from 0 to 1,000,000 degrees Fahrenheit in 3 seconds or a second.
Yeah, and so you won't suffer more than a nanosecond. But really, the rules of war were set up to maintain a civil veneer of what is actually happening, that there is a separation between a foreign occupying military force and the territory and the people and the property of a militarily occupied body politic or nation, and how the rules, when I say a civil veneer, if you ask most people, do you realize that your government is a foreign occupying power that has been at war with you for the last 100 years or for the entirety of your life? If you're less than 85 years old, people would say you're crazy. That's not true. But when you actually study and you approach it as a whole system, and you understand all those component parts that I mentioned, including the esoterica and all of the things that are hardwired into the system of law and money and so forth, that you understand that, yes, it's a matter of war against an occupied people and territory, and the rules thereof, the rules of military occupation, the rules of maritime and admiralty law. And the word maritime comes from the same root as the word martial, which comes from the word Mars and the Roman god of war as Mars. And in fact, if you really go back in the esoteric systems and weed out the bullshit and all the new age overlay, that's just another dressing up the old-fashioned religion in a new dress.
I get sick of that, I tell you.
Yeah. But you see, I started my life 4 or 5 years old. I was compelled by something inside of me to go into all of that. Well, it wasn't the new age reality in my, when I was 5 to 10 years old. That was late 50s, early 60s. But, when I was 5, 6 years old, I was getting little printed newsletters about UFOs, and I was studying all of that, and I was looking up in the sky and trying to figure things out. and started reading things that most people never read in their whole lives when I was 7, 8 years old. And so by the time I was 15, I was always more mystical than grounded in the physical reality. If I had been told that I would be doing what I'm doing today when I was 15 years old, I would say, no way. Although there were component elements that were embedded seeds that have logically led me in my life path to where I'm at. But I fully immersed in the quote unquote new age. But I did it at a level that was really more intense, more widespread, and deeper than almost all of the New Agers ever did. I read voraciously, and I read a whole spectrum of many, many sources. And that led me into starting to really understand how the esoteric side was put together. Once I started studying law and history and money, and seeing that there were flip sides of the same coin, and seeing how the esoteric was what controlled and compelled the organization and the implementation of the elite and the cabal and everything that's going on today, I really started putting it together and understanding both sides of that. And so the New Age and the metaphysical and the esoteric led me into law. Life circumstances led me into getting into law in the late 90s or late 80s, early 90s. And I jumped right in, feet first. It wasn't mamby-pamby. I was dealing with a lot of things with some very advanced people who were the grandfathers of the law movement in the early to mid 90s. And that then led me into some of the most advanced commercial processes that were coming through and were available at that time. And so I was guided by mentors starting in the mid 90s to really engage with all of that. And I learned the commercial process and the reality of the commercial system quite comprehensively between, say, 1995 and the early 2000s. And I mastered it. I truly mastered it. I could show you documents that I was doing and procedures and processes that were beyond almost everything that most people were doing. And that still is a foundational part of what I do today, because you have to understand how commerce works in order to understand everything else. Yeah. And the key in those processes in commerce was based in large part on what is called administrative process. Means non-judicial, means you don't sue somebody. If you've got a mortgage issue or a court issue or a tax issue, you don't go into court and sue. You do what's called a non-judicial administrative process based on commercial principles in the UCC commercial code. And that has very specific codified rules that you have to follow. Most people don't even know that when they're doing things in commerce, like acceptance for value or notices of liability. They don't have a comprehensive understanding of how commerce works. And
I also think, just to cut in here just for a moment, because I want other people who are outside the US as well to realize that the UCC isn't just US applied, is it? That is actually pretty much the daddy of every other subset that comes under it, like our personal property securities register and things of that nature here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's tied together through the central bank system, because the process of securitized or monetized instruments going through central banks and going into the domestic systems, and then the domestic systems monetizing the people and property and gross domestic products that then come back through the central bank into the international system through balances of trade and the World Bank and the IMF, and the Bank of International Settlements. It's all based on the same thing. It all goes back to what's called the Lex Mercantoria, which is Roman law merchant. It's the law of the sea and the law of cargo, all bills of lading, and security instruments that were used to secure shippers and producers and purchasers and all the rest of it. So this is thousands of years old. And again, it was perfected in the United States because the U.S. via Washington, D.C. is part of the Triple Crown. And the U.S. through Washington, D.C., its purpose was to create the largest military on the planet for enforcement and the entire monetary and banking system through the Federal Reserve, underwritten by the Uniform Commercial Code, and through the central bank reserve system, so that all the central banks were using Federal Reserve notes as reserve currency. And of course,
exactly.
the petrodollar.
Hence the petrodollar too, isn't it? The same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
The US domination.
Exactly. Yeah. So through all of that, every central bank on the planet has Federal Reserve notes as reserve currency, as well as using to purchase their energy through the petrodollar, which is the underwriting, is the two foundational planks of a domestic economy. So you have to understand how the UCC system in the United States works to be able to understand its variation in its application in New Zealand, Australia, and everywhere else. So back to non-judicial administrative commercial process, we would do something called an affidavit of obligation. And I started doing this in 1995, 96 with the IRS. And an affidavit of obligation basically operates on the UCC, administrative process, and the nature of obligations of contracts, which I'm going to describe very simply. And it's important, and we'll lead this back to law, form, and jurisdiction and going to peace. So we would create an affidavit of obligation. It's an affidavit, so you're making a affidavit sworn statement. And what we would do in the beginning of those affidavits is quote the maxims of commerce or commercial maxims. Some of them are, a man is worthy of his hire, meaning that your labor is your value and should be reciprocated in equal consideration or equal value. A affidavit is sovereign in commerce. So in other words, that the affidavit as a sworn statement is paramount and things like that. And they all made a lot of sense when you looked at it, and you would set this up. So if it was a mortgage foreclosure situation, you were going to challenge the validity of the mortgage or the obligation. You would say all the facts in the affidavit of obligation based on the commercial maxims. And it was set up in such a way that they were required to respond. Now, in commerce, if someone does not respond, if they reject it or they're silent, that's a dishonor. If you go into dishonor, then two more steps, that dishonor is perfected and can be converted to a binding obligation. That's why it's called an affidavit of obligation. You have an obligation to respond. If you don't respond, then you go into fault. I give you a notice of fault and the opportunity to cure your fault. And then if you don't respond to that, I give you a notice of default. And after default, you are in dishonor. This is what the IRS and all the tax agencies on the planet do. They don't tell you you're doing that, but when they send you a notice of deficiency or a demand for a return or whatever, they're giving you a notice and demand, converting it into a perfected liability when you go into dishonor. Okay. It was all based on one of those commercial maxims. And that maxim stated, he who leaves the field of battle first loses. And we all thought, and I thought, well, that's it. That cinches it. When they leave the field of battle and they go into dishonor, they have automatically left the field and they've lost. And that all was logical. And as I said, I mastered commerce in these processes more than almost anybody. I did them for 14 years. And when a lot of people were trying to stop mortgages and foreclosures using similar things, but not understanding the completeness of the process, a lot of people went to jail because they were doing things with liens and otherwise that they left open holes because it wasn't truly perfected. I looked at all of that because I have a very precise analytical mind, and I can see all of the permutations of things missing or not missing and so forth.
Yep.
I was able to do things that that were very successful, and I never even came close to going to jail or being indicted for something like that. As I watched literally hundreds and hundreds of people be indicted, go to jail, and go to prison. But one day, I was delivered two very important pieces to the puzzle. One was when somebody said to me one day, well, you know, you're still setting this up as a debtor-creditor relationship. There's still a debtor relationship, and you're attached to, even if you think you're the creditor by reversing the roles and you're the secured party in commerce, you're still attached to the debt. There's a lot more to that, but we don't need to go into that. But the other thing is, one day I woke up and I realized, as I was starting to understand going to peace and how we really had the power by doing that, which was that for as long as we stayed in the battlefield, and commerce is a battlefield, as it says right there, a maximum of commerce says he who leaves the battlefield first loses. Well, it's telling you that commerce is a battlefield. This is where the rules of war comes in. This is where the entirety of the last 150 years of setting it up to justify the maritime admiralty relationship to the monetary system and bankruptcy, the bonded security relationship to the flesh and blood being and the property of the occupied territory, and all of those rules as a field of battle, and most especially setting up the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1917. That's what the United States did. And if you look deep into your statutes and codes in New Zealand and everywhere else, you will find a similar act that was set up. And in the United States in 1917, it defined what the enemy was. They went to war against Germany and defined what could or could not be done in trading with the enemy. Okay.
That's right.
But it excluded U.S. persons and persons within the jurisdiction and subject thereto to the jurisdiction of the United States. But in 1933, after the full military occupation was perfected and the full bankruptcy was perfected, it converted the U.S. citizen / person to the enemy of the state. Okay. And so everything was now a matter of military occupation under international treaties and conventions and the rules of war of how a military occupied territory and people would be treated as an enemy, but in the maintenance of the civil order within the civil body and the rules that would apply to that. And then when, through the Bretton Woods Agreement, the Federal Reserve Note was made the reserve currency of every central bank on the planet. And then in 1971-72, it was made the petrodollar that was the only instrument that could acquire petroleum on the planet and control energy. And the growth of the consumption of energy is directly related to the growth of the Federal Reserve Note as the global currency.
Yeah, that's bang on, actually.
Let me finish.
Yeah, it was
so that created every person in every corporate jurisdiction under bankruptcy and military occupation as a military occupied territory in bankruptcy, and persons within the jurisdiction of the United States and subject thereto. Okay, go ahead.
I was just thinking, it makes perfect sense, because here in New Zealand we have a lot of different camps. Everyone's pushing what they believe is their, I don't know, silver bullet against the system. You've got the common law advocates. You've got those selling and pushing, holding seminars for the affidavit of truth. You've got, and some will go in on their own steam with the natural law, and I'll get you to explain a bit about natural law, the difference between common law, natural law, and all the other laws that are out there. I just said it's my law. I say what goes. That's sort of how I do things. But when a judge leaves, because sometimes you get an argument with them, and they'll get up and they'll go out, and the one standing there thinks I've won because the judge has left. But if we apply the rules of battle, knowing a little about it myself, that's strategic repositioning, isn't it? It's not actually.
It's more than that. Let me tell you what's happening when the judge leaves the courtroom and then comes back. Okay. He is subject to 3 oaths that bind him to his robe, his bench, and his function there in the courtroom. Okay. Yeah. First of all, the courtroom is the bench he sits on, of course, is the bank. It is also a temple. Okay. The clerk, which is derived, that English word's derived from the word cleric, which means priest. Okay. So the clerk is the priest of the temple. And it's also the helm of the ship. So he's acting as the captain of the ship. And if you are subordinate to him, as all parties on a ship at sea under the rules of admiralty, the captain is the law. Okay. So if you mutiny on his ship, then he has levels and degree of what he's capable of doing that you have no clue what he's doing. So he has 3 levels of oath that he's taken. The ultimate level is to the deep, basically satanic system that we know is completely rife throughout the entire world system, government, banking, and so forth. And when he leaves, he's going back into his chambers. And he's basically taking off the robe of the first level, and they're specific ones, and I forget what. It's been a long time since I looked at that, but they're very specific. And he's doing rituals in his chamber, and then he's putting his robe back on, and he's coming back at the second level of what his jurisdiction and his oath keeping binds himself to. And he will come back now, and he will run certain very precise ritualized processes with who he's dealing with. And if he gets chased out of the room again, or if he chooses to leave, he will go to the 3rd level, that unless you know precisely what he's doing, he has complete control over that entire situation because of the binding nature of our acquiescence and consent to being in the status that normally most people are, which is the bonded surety under military occupation, admiralty law, bankruptcy, to the commercial instrumentality of a bankrupt franchise, your name, your birth certificate account, and all of that. And being an enemy of the state, the acceptance of licenses to operate in their sandbox, in their commercial arena, to create securitized instruments that you have the privilege and the benefit of using. See, and this is the key, that if you don't know that this is your status, and whether you stay outside of the courtroom and you do affidavits of truth or different things, notices of liability and so forth, you are acting under international rules of war as a belligerent, as a combatant, as a bankrupt who has no standing to state a claim, and all of these things. So it's a complete ritual. It's a complete circus. And the key, going back to our primary subject, going to peace, is that when you come to understand exactly how this is set up, and that going to peace really means removing yourself from the field of battle, declaring peace, and knowing how to deal with what they throw at you, just like in the first Matrix movie, when Neo finally got the whole thing and he saw the code of the Matrix, and he knew that the agents of the Matrix only had power over him through his ignorance of the code of the matrix. And once he saw, the green code flowing down, and he saw that it flows through everything, including his body, because it was a projected avatar coming from the real world, going into the matrix and dealing with the matrix on its own terms.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is why I use the phrases, the only way out is in, going to peace, which means one, like I started with, doing the inner work, resolving our self-contained conflict that we project outward into the enemy construct, but knowing how we are in a field of battle, we're in an engagement of war that has rules that have been laid down over thousands of years and really millions of years beyond just this realm that we're in. And that when we take the responsibility, rather than feeling victimized or disempowered, by being responsible, by going to peace, understanding it doesn't mean being passive, it means being real. And the power in that is extraordinary. And I am a living example of that. I've been doing what I've been doing for 30 years. I started dancing with the IRS in 1992, or really 1991, so 30 years ago. I stopped filing taxes in 88. Okay. So I haven't filed a tax return in, 34 years. Very few people can say they've done that without having the IRS, come take it all away and throw you in jail. And I've dealt with every level of it. The IRS, the FBI, Securities Exchange Commission, local police, many, many things. And I learned how to empower myself with the knowledge and the understanding of how to do things without going to war. Because the bottom line is they are masters of war. They know how to do war. That's all they really know how to do. And they've converted it into a civilized system of a monopoly board that you think you're dealing with law or affidavits of truth or all these things, common law, but you're not. You're dealing with a battlefield and the rules of war, and you don't know what those rules are. Okay. That's what we're moving towards perfecting. It's already really perfected, but we have to substantiate it and really build it within the kingdom of David and the DaVita society, and lay the foundations that we can really train and educate large numbers of people to know how to do what I'm talking about, what I've done in a short amount of time. We don't have 30 years for everybody to go through it. So, and it is quite doable. And this is what we do in Pantera and Gemstone and so forth. And, we'll get into this a little later as far as your other questions about the private society, the private contract association, and other things that we can use.
Yeah. There's a lot of, like I said, there's many groups pushing many things, and they are quite steadfast in their position and belief in those things. Unfortunately, I've called it out myself. There are a lot of people who are pushing certain law types in their minds, but they provide no backup, no explanation. People are left hanging when they are confronted with the reality. A lot of people go and to seminars, workshops, they get imparted a lot of information. Some of it is good.
A lot of it's good.
But it's never complete. That's the problem, yeah. And because of that, their level of knowledge is not passed on to the others. It's like a factory, a human grocery store. Come on in. Mm-hmm. Here's your papers. You fill out your name here. You send them off. They don't say why the document's structured that way, the reason behind it, or the form that you are addressing on the other side, your counterpart, as it were. Just here, and here. And that's what I like about Pantera and Gemstone University and the KOD, is that before you can go on and start serving papers and start creating them, you have to know why it's been done. And that to me is probably the single best aspect, is that unless you, it's like basically going to school. You don't pass or graduate or get degrees or masters or anything like that unless you know what the hell you're talking about. Although I must admit, universities are more regurgitating information
now
very
it
much
is.
into you.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a prescribed manner. They pat you on the head with you and they say, go on and continue to manifest our reality and to help with the people. So that's why I like the fact that we now have something conscious that we can work with to not so much push back, peaceably, create type thing. And like I said, I'm probably the hardest one to ever put that concept through. I've been on a war footing, a war mindset, everything combative throughout my whole life, from the time I was born with flat lungs fighting for my life, all the way through school, arguments with teachers that doesn't make sense, job hopping because you'd get something just right. They would tell you that's wrong, and yet you've increased their bottom line. Everything to me was war. Going into the military, missions overseas for over 20 years on and off, taking out trash, whatever they call it. All of it, at the end of it all, I come to the realization, wait a minute, this whole thing makes no sense. I'm basically a pawn in a game for someone else's agenda. I'm the sharp end of a political will. And I ceased doing that. And I thought, wait a minute, I think I'll fight home. But even then I had the concept wrong. It was like, why should I go over there and fight everyone else? My battle is at home. Why don't I sort home out first and like sort your own backyard before you mess with your neighbors? That type of thing. So the fact that I, of all people, am starting to see sense in this, and I'm actually actively pursuing it and living it, it's definitely testament to it. I've done all the others, like nowhere near as in depth as you, but I've done the common law thing. I've done the fight the tax department. I've done the help with native issues and all that sort of stuff, and fight it all the way through the courts and everything. And in some ways, I was very successful. In other ways, I wasn't. Yet I did them very much the same. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. How can I be right 1 minute? I do the same thing and I'm wrong. It makes no sense. And it's like this is designed that way. The whole thing is designed to give you the belief that what you're doing is going to manifest a win. And yet that's the trap. And I'm starting to now see with your help, all of these trap doors, and I'm avoiding them now, which is awesome.
Well, they set up a false sense of security, a false sense of safety in what you're doing, and the system is designed that way. But going back a step to what you were saying with what now is happening, from what I'm hearing from you and others quite extensively in New Zealand, Australia, and probably other places, UK, Europe, and so forth, is what was very strong, happening quite a lot in the, not so much the 90s, but the 2000s and the two teens, which was the whole seminar circuit and all those kind of things. I've gone to many of them, and you would go for 2 days or 3 days, sometimes 4 or 5 days, and somebody who had succeeded in doing something would then go on the circuit. He or she would package it up and go teach it for 2 days. Okay. And you'd meet people, you'd exchange phone numbers, and but you would go home and you'd start putting it together. Very few people had the support system or the network to sustain and continue and get answers to questions. And then the people who did the seminars, some of them tried to set it up for, communications, and just send me an email or whatever, but only a few of many even would follow up with that. And the few who did, they did not really follow up. And sooner or later, it overwhelmed them. They didn't have the time to answer and sustain and support enough people, and they would fall by the wayside, and people would be left stranded, floating in a life raft in the middle of the ocean, because that's where they were. They were on the Sea of Commerce, and they didn't know how to get to land. So all of the things that I observed is what then we formulated in how to address those problems and those issues inside our society. And many elements of Pantera that we have developed over 20 years have come out of that experience in that process, seeing what the deficits were and what the requirements were to resolve those deficits. And we don't have to go into all the detail. You personally are experiencing that. You see what we've got set up. You see what's inside the Gemstone site for members only and on our chats and otherwise. We have a system of continuity, sustainability, and support that has never been done in this in this arena of, law and processes to extricate oneself from the matrix. Now we're at a point after 20 years, and it's taken us 20 years to perfect a lot of things. We're ready to expand that and reproduce the model and the template. So along comes the kingdom of David and everything we've talked about before, and that's on the Proclamation of Peace website, of how that all works, why that works, the jurisdiction, the law form, and we'll speak about the law form in a minute, that now we have where I was directing Pantera to go to, but at a level and capacity that I'm quite sure Pantera would have never been able to achieve. And other things are converging at this time. It's no accident of the timing of the convergence together of Pantera and KOD, the emergence of DaVita Society as sort of a fusion and a blend, which was set up to be a reproduction of the same model as Pantera and to maintain the sovereign integrity and the true, basically those words, sovereign integrity of the people and the whole of that society within KOD without subjugating to a monarch or to a royalty. And some of the things that people complain about, or they say, well, I'm not going to go under a king or a monarch or whatever. They're not understanding how we've set that up. Okay.
That's exactly what we're getting. That's exactly what, I'm glad you addressed it, because we're getting, who's this guy? How's he a king? I'm not going to be under no king, especially, it doesn't matter who they are.
Well, what's ironic. What's ironic, they say, well, I'm not going to be under a king. Well, excuse me, look around. You are under a monarch. It happens to be a queen or a king dressed up as a queen. I don't know, but I won't go there. Who knows these days? But if you think you're free, and I get that all the time. Well, who does Ken think he is? And he's going to try to subjugate me and dominate and control me. I'm going to stay out here where I'm a free man. And no, you aren't. You are completely controlled. You are mind controlled. You are controlled by forces and factors that you don't even know or understand. And only with the kind of comprehensive knowledge and real on the ground applications and ability to resolve things will anybody ever be free. So we can come back to the monarch issue in a minute, but as I was saying, the DaVita Society is a perfect fusion and integration of where the KOD lineage was coming from and where we've been building for 20 years, Pantera and the Gemstone, the education and the sustainability through a society that is mutually beneficial by support of each other and the growth and the continuity that we have together. It's never, I can guarantee you will not find this anywhere else in the world in terms of people attempting to walk out of the matrix. And now that all is converging at the same time that we're at a crescendo of world history. The 5,000 plus years of what in the esoteric world they call the great work of the ages. If you look at a man named Manly P. Hall or Manly Palmer Hall, one of the greatest minds and writers of the 20th century in the whole esoteric world, his primary phrase is the great work of the ages. And if you, and he's got his sort of magnum opus, it was called the teachings of, I forget the title, but you can find that easily enough. But that was the phrase that the system behind the system always used, the great work of the ages. It was to perfect a world system of bondage and control to arrive at the crescendo point of this time we are actually now living in, to complete that great work, which was the complete enslavement of the human population as a feeding trough forever. And it's all converging at the same time. So if we go back to that beginning point we talked about earlier, the concern of people saying, if I go to peace and I'm being passive, I'm going to be obliterated by the system. Well, we've discussed those key points. It's not passive, it's being empowered. It's taking responsibility for the fact that we are the creators. And when you create something, you are superior to that creation. And you have the capacity to uncreate it. Okay. Yeah. You can redirect that energy flow of your life force into what we are now creating. It has to have a receptacle. There's a transfer mechanism of this world system that we have the ability with the knowledge that we have to effect. But if we don't have a receptacle, it's like that hose. If you're pouring your hose into the neighbor's pond, that's all well and good. I'm not going to do that anymore. But what if you don't have a pond that you dug to redirect the water? Okay, you got nowhere to go. It's going to flow onto the land. And hey, guess what? The slope's going to take it right back to your neighbor's pond. And that's how the system is set up. And unless you know that, and unless you know that the paramount requirement for what we're here to do is having a receptacle that we can transfer ourselves, our living being, our substance, our creator capacity into something that will hold and sustain and substantiate what we wish to create in this world, then you don't understand, one, who we all are, and two, how we're going to affect a real transformation in this world.
Yeah, exactly. Another question. Are you lot just trying to preserve a bloodline, because it sounds, this is, believe me, I've had this as well. And it comes mainly from these ex-ministers, religious ministers. And like I said, people know I'm not religious in any way, shape, or form. Do I have a belief? Yeah, but not in the type of thing they do. Then they say, oh, you're an ex-Freemason, therefore you must believe in Satan. I said, will you find Satan for me? They can't, of course. It's just a concept or an idea. And then I said, and then show me God. Again, concept, idea that we've created. I said, you're looking at both. You're looking at both of them. And I decide which one comes out, obviously, like we all do. Like you say, we're basically creators of our own reality. But at the same time, others are creators of theirs. And sometimes that messes up our plans. So people have got to understand that unless they realize they're all on one unified field, we're going to continue to have these waves all over the place, and they're going to cancel each other out and bang into each other. So is the kingdom of David all about preserving a bloodline, becoming the new great reset to suck everybody in? Believe me, I've had this question as well, and I thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask every question I've been asked. I'm going to ask you, and we can finally put it to rest. Because I keep saying to them, if you've got problems or you suspect this, show us the evidence. Counterspin's all about facts and evidence. And I wouldn't have even gone in on this, as I said to James in the early days and myself and you through our discussions, I wouldn't have even entertained it if I thought I was going to be on my knees to anybody, because that's just never been me. Yeah. I didn't even get on my knees for me. So, but if we can clarify. Well, first of all, that'll be great.
If anybody wants to look at my history of what I've done in the last 30 years, and really what I've done in the last almost 68 years, I'll be 68 in the less than 70 days. And as I said, I started when I was really 4 or 5 years old. So I've been at this for definitely 60 and more years. You can go talk to my teachers in grammar school and high school. I was never anybody to bend the knee. they would never get me to bend a knee. Now, I went into one of my fascinations early on in my life studies was to penetrate to the core of what religion was. Like I said, I was a metaphysical, a new ager, all that stuff, but I had a probing mind that would not be satisfied with partial answers. So I penetrated into studying world religions. And I've been doing that for 50 years and longer. I never grew up indoctrinated in a religion. My family is Jewish from genetics and heritage, but fortunately my parents did not enforce, well, you got to go to Hebrew school and be bar mitzvah and do all that. So I never got indoctrinated into being a good Jewish adherent. To me, it was a cultural thing. I grew up in LA, and in LA, relatively non-Orthodox Jews, their main religion was food, so we went to the deli and had bagels and lox. And, my father had a delicatessen for 10 years when I was 7 to 17, so to me, being Jewish was a lot of good food. It was a culture, not a religion to me. In fact, I didn't understand my other relatives who were into all of that. Later, I had, some juxtaposition as I studied history and all of that. But the point is, I've been studying religion for a long time. I've never read the Bible cover to cover. I would like to do that at some point. Of course, I get a little bit into it and I go, this is just boring and, but there's very deep and wide elements in the Bible that are major factors and major clues. So I have studied that quite extensively, mostly the symbolic, the esoteric, and the elements of commerce and equity and many other aspects of it, not the binding nature of the religion. But that study and that background enabled me to sit down with David when I met him. And I spent a year really penetrating and probing to make sure, because when I started to say with this,
not in a weird way, of course, not in a weird way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Intellectual. Yeah. Because believe me, we have people that watch our show that are a little slow on the uptake. Any word we get out of place,
I understand.
It is somehow a code for the great conspiracy to subjugate them all.
Using my mind to penetrate the truth or non-truth of what he presented as who he was in context and relationship to both the Bible and the larger context of world history, as I have mastered quite extensively through my decades of study. So I spent that year making sure what I started to say with this whole little monologue was, I am the last one to bend the knee or in any way subjugate myself to an outside authority. I've been that way since birth. I've been that way through kindergarten, grammar school, and anybody who knows me from way back then knows that, no, I did not do that. And I've never left that path. So you just have to understand, those watching and listening to this, that I would never, ever, ever subjugate myself to a authoritarian hierarchical control system, nor would I put my entire life and reputation on the line by promoting it and putting it out there for others to follow. There's a lot of things that I know where we're going. Not that I'm prophesying because I see in a mystical crystal ball, but because I have the knowledge of what this entire template in the world system and all of it is, and how we are going to achieve recreating a world system based on the original template of life, as opposed to the cult of death for control and domination. And I know how to put it together. Now, many or some would say, well, that's highly arrogant and egotistical of you, and that's your prerogative to think that. I'm just saying that I am uniquely configured with my knowledge, my experience, my inner capacity to see things in a dynamic way that very few can, because I have so many pieces in the physical reality and the metaphysical, if you will, reality. Plus, I'm in a unique position in terms of current world events. I know what's here, what's happening, what's about to happen, and I've prognosticated our last session, where I said I will guarantee that things are going to change with all these people, the Yacindas and the Scotts and the Borises and the
believe me,
Joes.
New Zealand can't wait. New Zealand cannot wait until that wreck is taken out of the picture.
Yeah, well, it's worldwide too. She's just one of the many. But I said on your show, the last one we did, and then some people have taken that one clip and they put it on Telegram and so forth, where I'm saying, I guarantee within the next month, and I think it's been about a month. So people are partly saying, well, he guaranteed a month. That was 29,
no, I actually took that to be the end of January myself.
Yeah, well, let's take it as the end of January. But, that's an approximate, because we're in a flow of world events that is literally creating itself moment to moment. The factors that are unfolding now are beyond almost everybody's capacity to understand, because they don't have all of the detail and the information. But ultimately, what I'm saying is we're coming to a convergence of all these things. And I would never, ever put myself or anybody else under a control of a monarchical, hierarchical system. But at the same time, in the same way, I've perfected and mastered my ability to use the law to both protect myself, remove myself from bondage, and create a framework and a blueprint of how we can create, using those building blocks and those inverted templates, to write them and face them back forward, to be optimally supportive of all living beings, people on this planet, in a world system that really works. But that's where we're going. And utilizing the lineage and the bloodline, as people would say it, of the House of Weems, the House of David, to that benefit and to that effect is what we're doing here. So I took a good solid year to make sure that David, not only the structural parts of what he was doing in the KOD, where was at that time, but the man himself, who I needed to know was not going to go to war with me or fight me and say that, no, I'm the king and I know better because I come from a line of kings and you have to do what I say. If he had ever even remotely intimated that as a possibility or likelihood, we wouldn't be here today. But I sat with and met with the man for a very long time, consistently every day or almost every day for close to a year, before I was comfortable knowing that we would be able to work in synergy. And this was a meeting of two forces in two directions that were coming together by design from a very long time ago to affect what we're going to use KOD in that jurisdiction as the receptacle to have the people become the paramount authorities in their own lives, in law, in the capacity to return this world system to its rightful station, which is civil servants, truly to maintain a structural system to the benefit of life and the people and everything else here. That's where we're going.
Something we sure as hell ain't got now, obviously.
Something we don't have now.
Yep. I think for most it's the name, KOD, or Kingdom of David. It's too religious, and it's because of the indoctrination people have had all this time. So you've got people who aren't religious in any way, shape, or form saying, oh, stuff that. And then you've got people who are religious saying, well, hang on, who do they claim this? They think that Jesus or something, and couldn't they change it to something cooler, like, I don't know, Free World Patriot Front or something like that, to give a bit of oomph for it.
Well, we'll take that into consideration.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, we'll take that under advisement. But you can do anything you want via the DaVita Society and the court, and what we're putting in place there for people to create your own societies. And see, we're so programmed, we're so used to hierarchy and centralization, that people are projecting that, oh, it's just going to be the same thing. But that's not at all how I am, how I be, and how I live, and how I am creating the things that I'm bringing forward with David, with the Pantera team, and now the emerging DaVita Society. That people have to understand how deeply programmed we all really are. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm witness to the work you've done. I'm witness to the selflessness you've given, your time, your efforts, your own knowledge. You've even helped people formulate the forms in order to address a specific matter and things like that. Even some of them before their time, as it were, before they've fully learned properly. So that I've noticed these things, and because I keep track of that sort of thing, and I'm very impressed, I must admit. So thus far, bloody hard to impress me.
Thank you. Well, see what happens with that, what you're referring to, so everybody listening understands that, is, we launched the DaVita Society and the website Proclamation of Peace roughly 6 to 7 months ago. Okay. We have right now somewhere around 12 to 1,500 people who did the initial steps of that. Maybe 400 to 500 have actually completed with the documents and so forth. And the fact is that about half of them have come from New Zealand. Okay. So I go with the flow, to coin a cliche. Where the energy flows, it directs me, and that's where I know, okay, this is what needs to be addressed. Now, I'm operating at many levels, as you know, in terms of things that I do, what commands my attention and time every day. But at the same time, one of those very significant building blocks is what we're building with migrating what has been built in Pantera, the Gemstone University. We're actively in the process of migrating that into the DaVita Society and setting it up in organized layers and structure so that we can exponentialize the distribution of the education and the practical learning to apply in real time, for one, and for two, to build other things, such as our intended global media platform and other things like that.
Yeah.
But in the last 6-7 months, New Zealand has concurrently stepped up within that process with DaVita and so forth as the predominant force moving us forward with building on what we presented to the world last July, I think it was, when we opened it. And at the same time, concurrently, you guys are in the top 3 of the most fascistic implementation of the New World Order that exists on this planet.
And as you say, there are no coincidences.
Yeah, no.
New Zealand's the poster child for the Great Reset and those little satanic
Absolutely.
wombles who are hell-bent on controlling and subjugating everyone so they're in the loop, so they're in the Groundhog Day, so they're constantly being harvested and all that. So it's no, and as you say, because the energy was worse here, and it was by no coincidence that New Zealand was the first country in the world to see the light of the new day, how they set it. Well, we're here as a counter to that energy, and we're sucking the life force out of them for once, instead of them having carte blanche banquet over the rest of humanity here. So we are, like you say, we are now taking their footstools. We're slowly but surely taking the legs out, and we're about to hit the table. And that is where we are at the moment. And you can tell, because they are going crazy. They are wanting to jab everyone in sight. They're wanting to come after the kids. These new variants are all over the place. Jacinda's hoping to get a job with old Klaus Schwab or Mr. Schwab
Well,
or Schwab or whatever the hell you want to.
she's as we like to say, she's Klaus's number one bitch, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, but that was by design and by purpose. So, you know, people are born into bloodlines, into positions, they're groomed, they're set up for what their role is, just as the Mark Zuckerberg, that's how we like to call him.
Yeah, it's like a cyborg, isn't
he? You know, if you look at the history that's coming up from underground about Tartaria, which is a whole other subject we've been looking at for quite a number of years.
The mud floods and all that. Yep.
The mud floods, Tartaria, all the architecture, and a lot of what's been brought forward about a world civilization on a high order with free energy and things like that. Australia and New Zealand were always in a unique position relative to that world system. And in the Tartarian, or the destruction of the Tartarian global system or order, whatever you want to call it, one of the things that happened that comes out very clearly if you look into enough of that history is that in the late 1800s, individuals were identified to step into roles, to be put into roles, to become the world systems of the new world order. It wasn't by, you know, the grit of their own self creation, whatever. They were selected and they were put in those roles. The Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and all of those family names, they were put into these Tartarian buildings and mansions and said, well, this is the family mansion based on the wealth that they developed in the different industries of oil and steel and so forth.
Yeah.
And the same was done in Australia and New Zealand. The same was done worldwide. But they're just repeating the same thing in this period we're living in. You know, it's obvious who Bill Gates was as being a selected poster boy to be put in the position he was. It's obvious that Fauci was. It's obvious that Zuckerberg and Twitter boy and all the rest of them were put into these positions, not by their intelligence and their capacity to create these things. There's no way. Okay. So your Jacindas and your Scott Morrisons, they were selected long ago to be put into this role, but they're vacuous inside. They have no soul. They have no being. They have no substance to be able to do anything if they have to go off script. And what you're describing is they're being forced by living beings standing up, not consenting, and using the tools now that we've provided through KOD and Pantera and DaVita to start really grounding that in. And so what I was saying, when I go with the flow, I go where the energy is. So as you know, but our listening audience doesn't for the most part, several key situations have emerged by the DaVita members that are in New Zealand that I have taken some of the work out of status correction and the estate structure, creating private societies, and I'm leapfrogging and I'm condensing things and I'm putting them in a way that is applicable even before the people who are going to apply it really have the grounding in the education. We will catch up with the education, but we have essentially the law of necessity, the exigent circumstances of what is going on there, that we can't wait. You know, we can't wait a year for all of you to be educated. So, but I just finished writing a couple of documents that's going to be applied there in New Zealand just 20 minutes before we started. And what I've experienced this literally hundreds of times. When I sit down and I take the whole compendium of everything I've written and created and so forth, and I say, okay, here's a situation that requires a unique reconfiguration, and I have to distill down to a usable, manageable, functional way things that I would normally require somebody to spend a year or two being educated to actually use and apply. but we don't have that time. We don't even have a month. Okay. So as I was writing that, it's like I even am sort of, fascinated how things just show up in my thinking. I go, okay, well, I'll put this piece with this piece and we'll do this. And what I just finished, what I delivered to you and the group down there in New Zealand to be used over the next few days or week, is going to have a significant impact in consciousness to that whole matrix consortium that seems to think it is in complete power and playing out its agenda. But it really is, it's like a demolition of a big building,
Oh, yes.
It's like when everything's set and you blow off those charges and the support structure has been basically destroyed. You can look at the building and for a moment, it just kind of shivers. It's like it's thinking to himself, oh shit, I'm about to collapse. And that's what we're looking at.
9/11.
Yeah, well, that's what 9/11 was for sure. But that's what's happening to the matrix right now. And that's what people need to understand. The matrix is a thinly thinned out veil of illusion that no longer has an internal structure that's holding it together. It is shivering and shuddering right now, and it's about to collapse.
So it is. Its wheels are coming off for sure. That's what people say. Well, how come you're not scared? Saying to me, how come you're not worried about what you say, and how come you're not worried about whether they're going to come after you? I said, because they're nothing to me. They're less than nothing, and I don't pay them too much mind except when they get in my business, and then I deal with them. But I just fear for the ones who aren't or don't have that mindset, who actually they're targeting, because they will go after those that they believe have the mentality of being victims. Mm-hmm. They're the ones they go after. They don't go after anyone like us who are like, bring it on, come at me, because I already have you beaten. That's why they seem to shy away from this circle and go after the ones who believe they're victims and that they're going to be attacked.
Yeah, for sure. And that really gets down to our theme of the day, going to peace, going internal and dealing with those internal programs, fears, all those issues that have been done since the moment you were born, and actually before you were born. They were programmed through your mother's body and womb, all of her issues during her lifetime, the factors that influenced what was going on during your gestation, and then your birth, and then your younger years. All of these are indoctrinated programs that were designed to create a fear based on survival, period. If you don't conform...
That says a lot. Now I know.
What's that?
Well, that explains a lot. If I think back, that definitely explains a lot. No wonder I had it tough.
Yeah. But it's all based on fear and survival.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what they're using now. If you do not do what we say you have to do to maintain your survival mechanisms, your job or your business or whatever, you will die, period.
Yeah.
The irony is that they're forcing you to make a choice. It's still a consensual choice, forcing you to choose death, because that jab is death or disease or a serious impairment of your mental capacities, your spiritual capacities. It's affecting your genetics, which is real, where you connect to the universe at large. It is a ticket down the hole to death. So they're forcing you to choose death. And what you're allowing is the fear of death through your lack of ability to survive to make the choice into their hands. So you have to ask yourself, what am I really willing to do to compromise myself in this immediate moment, in the thought that I can't do anything else? Well, what you're forcing yourself to face is, no, you can do everything else. You can step out of the matrix. Okay, so say you're a nurse or a doctor and they kicked you out of the hospital, but you are a healer first before you went through their indoctrination of their medical schools, which just indoctrinated you into their vaccines and their drugs and their, chemotherapy and all the other tools of death that they call medicine. So be thankful that higher aspect of yourself that's a true healer forced you to make that decision. So now you just simply have to pick yourself up and feel like you're a newly born babe in a new reality and start remembering who you are, that you have the capacity to create your life any way you want without those limitations. Because when we were created as an enemy of the state and we were put into the current system, we accepted licenses to do what was illegal in their system because we were an enemy. A license is a variance to enable somebody to do something that is considered illegal. So whether you have a marriage license, a driver license, a medical license, or anything else, you're doing something illegal that they consider you will be given a variance to be licensed to do it as long as you conform and follow their rules. Okay. Well, how many things can you find on the internet right now of nurses and doctors confessing that what they're doing is they're selling their souls for silver coins to euthanize and kill their patients? COVID is not killing anybody. Hospitals are killing people, and they're being paid for it. You're being paid off to do that. So anybody who's still doing that, if you know these facts, you have to face your conscience and say, is that what you're really willing to do? To by day, because you want to survive and get a paycheck, actually contribute to the murder and the genocide of humanity, and then go home to your children or your spouse and say everything's okay because I got paid today?
I suppose that's the one thing that really annoys me. We got people who believe they're awake. They understand everything that's going on. They understand that there's a parasitical leech that's a genocidal maniac running a program to subjugate, kill, and feed off us all. They share the memes about it. They say, do not comply. And they give all the nice cliches that you bandy around, like, they're bandying around the cocktails at a bloody party. But then you see them put on their mask to walk in a shop. Then you see them, get their little passes out and stuff like that. And it's just like, wait a minute. Are you not holding two diametrically opposed positions in the same body? Mm-hmm. No wonder you are paralyzed. No wonder you can't do anything. No wonder nothing's changing around you. Me, I don't mask. I don't social distance. Certainly ain't going to get no experimental toxin to change me and hook me up to the matrix. So I'm a pure blood. People say, oh, you're trying to be, Nazi-fied and a pure race and all that sort of stuff. No, my blood is pure of that crap. That's what it means for all those idiots who think they're going to start waffling on about some other crap. But do you see what I mean? How do they break out of that? Because thinking about it, believing you know it, and acting it are completely worlds apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the hypocrisy is significant in the religious community,
Oh, hell yes.
Churches. Okay, so I'll put this out to anybody who is religious in a Christian framework and the Bible and so forth. Do you realize if you've taken the jab that you've broken the 10 commandments? That there's a commandment that says, thou shalt not commit adultery, which is only the King James version overlay to create this polarity in the sexual arena, but it has nothing to do with sex or fidelity or anything. What it was actually the original tenet was thou shalt not adulterate the purity of your vehicle in this life, your body, your form. And when you take that jab, you have committed adultery, the worst kind. You have adulterated your blood and your genetics and your cells, and you have really bound yourself to something that is exactly what you go to church and say, we're we're of the good guys, and the devil and Satan is of the bad guys. But you just bought the ticket the wrong direction. Okay.
Yep.
So
And it's a
if you
fast train.
have done that already, you can still heal it. You can still purify it. Those are the things that we, as a collective body in the DaVita Society and Kingdom and Pantera, are going to bring forward, along with many, many other people in the world, of how to at least reverse the worst part of that. But the design of the DaVita Society and the Proclamation of Peace and the documents that are put forward there was put forward for people to come together. People, when we originally put it out there, said, well, how are you going to enforce this? How is this going to be effective? The only way it could be effective is if enough people in a concentrated area, in a country as small as New Zealand, or in a region of New Zealand, like where you are on the South Island, if that community came together, right now there's 500 or 600 people in New Zealand as a total who've signed in, but maybe only 200 or 300 have actually completed the documents. Well, if each one of you got 10 to 20 people to do the same, and you became a force of 5,000 to 10,000, all sending those notices, all learning what Kelvyn and others are learning and actually applying now, and started doing the same things that we're doing with the businesses that are not consenting to be dominated or forced out of business, and all the rest of that. If you came together, the power of that, and it is going to peace by retaking your responsibility and your capacity to do that. The power of that will just literally be the force that will obliterate that skeletal structure that's still trying to hold itself intact.
Yeah, because a lot of people right now will think, oh, hang on, so it's not going to work if we have, until we get everyone on board. That's not what he's saying. He's saying the law form works already, but to change everything to the new system and everyone stepping out and living in a parallel society, the other one's going to collapse like a wizened up old piece of bacon on a frying pan on high heat.
Yeah.
How's that?
So
Pretty good description. I quite like that.
Yeah, something like that. So let's talk about law form, and let's also talk about the current time frame. Today is Wednesday, January 5th. What's going to happen, and I know I said this, I guarantee we talked about it earlier, it's going to happen in a month, so it takes a little longer, but it's happening right now. But in the next 30 to 90 days, the first quarter of this year, we are going to have not only just KOD and Pantera, but many groups around the world are going to have the means and the ability to set things up. So those of you who are hanging on the edge, that I said in our last session, just go home, shut the door, and sit still. And then
Relax.
you say, yeah, but it's easy enough for you to say, but I don't have a paycheck anymore if I've left the job, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, come together in your community, support each other, start sharing what you've got and making sure everybody's okay to get through this eye of the needle, or this last moment of constriction. With the KOD jurisdiction and what we're going to do with the Treasury and the banking, and our ability recognized in law, supported by the law form, which we'll get into in a moment, to create a new issue, a monetary issue that you can then, as your local community, start using to start supporting each other and building a new social economic structure as a divergence or a bifurcation from where the matrix is going. It's clear that billions of people, or at least hundreds of millions, have made a choice to go down the drain of transhumanism and all of that. That is their free will choice. They have been, the programmers or the controllers behind it have been trying to get that horde of people to become like, in the movie, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. If they see somebody who hasn't been occupied and possessed by a body snatcher, they go,
Yes.
and
Off they go.
they go after them. Well, they're trying to do that. It's working in some cases. It's not working in a lot of cases. But they're on their way to where they're going. But we're experiencing a real bifurcation, a separation of realities, which is a separation of consciousness. And their attempt to do a great reset, there's vast cycles that they're trying to sustain and maintain that has controlled this creational field, this hologram, for a lot longer than anybody realizes, millions of years. We've been on a time loop where we've been being fed off of as source-connected beings by a parasitic consciousness and force that knows how these cyclical processes go. We're at the culmination of that. They're trying to implement what they call this great reset to begin it over again, to begin another thousands of years cycle in which we are enslaved and we are the feeding trough for the parasite. But our consciousness has grown up to the point where we're not going to allow that to happen. We are separating from that. They have a destination where I can guarantee you and I would not want to be going. Okay.
Exactly.
But they bought the ticket and they got the t-shirt. But we have the receptacle, the jurisdiction, the law form, and the resources now to build a new world system for ourselves. I'm not here to save the world. I'm not here to save anybody. I'm here to be part of creating a different reality that we who honor life and honor and respect each other wish for ourselves and for our children, and on from there. So focus on that. We are ready to start building it. We have the means, and that's what I mean by the transfer mechanism and the receptacle. That's why I aligned with David and the KOD. It's not a matter of a bloodline. It's not a matter of archaic history or biblical prophecy or anything like that. It's a matter that the law form, we're able to build a law form in this jurisdiction that is a synthesis and an integration of the best of all law forms. So common law has some great things. It has some terrible things in it. Common law basically is Old Testament law. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But that's based on this concept of a vengeful and wrathful God. If you don't follow his rules and follow his priests, they'll stone you in the town square. Okay.
Wait till they get to the point where they actually realize that is them.
That's right. So there's good things in common law, but you have to understand how common law works. There's great things in equity. So far, I haven't seen any downsides to equity, but you have to understand how equity works. You have to understand how commerce works, the things we talked about earlier, the administrative process, how we can use those in equity, in the private side, in going to peace, and what the power of that actually is. So when we speak of the law form, we can adopt any part of any law form of any jurisdiction and make it part of our law form in our jurisdiction. So we're going to use the best of anything in the history of law and leave all the crap behind. In order to do that, we have to be educated. We have to understand how those things work.
Natural law. That's a big thing here now.
Yeah,
pushing natural law.
What's that mean to you, or what's that mean to the people who are pushing it?
Good question. To me, natural law is, first in time, best in law is what seems to be the thing now. And I believe that actually. Before the creation of, this is within the matrix, not before we got here and how we've generated this and let them take over. But he who creates controls. Now, if I'm first and I then come together with others and collectively we decide to create a service over here that looks after us, a government, let's say, that's a creature of our mind. It's a concept of government. Then we pick a few more of us to occupy positions within that government to basically watch our back while we get on with life. That to me is a natural process of how things should be. We're up here because that's a creation and just a concept to work for us. We direct that, tell it what to do. They agree. That's the contract we have. But somehow that's got turned upside down. And of course, the mirror came in and the fishhook started again, and back in we were. But natural law is, to me, personally, it's about the symbiotic link between mankind and the land, and the duality of the us tend to it, it sustains us. And to me, that link is probably the most powerful form of anything, because they say possessions 9/10 of the law, you know, and the other 10%, like they've split the title. Here in 1987, we had the Land Transfer Act. Before that, you could run away from the cops after driving erratically through the streets. For some reason, they're after you. You made it home and they couldn't come on your property. That was just a fact. They had to wait. After the Land Transfer Act, where they split the title, gave you the legal right to occupy only, and they kept the equitable title, or they suddenly were the beneficial owners somehow of, and no more was it your home is your castle. They can now come and go at will. And all laws that have been created by government have never been about preserving our freedom, enhancing our lives in any way. It's all been to restrict someone. Every law is a restrictive law. Everything is a binding type thing. And to me, natural law is back to mankind and land, and mutually a mutual beneficial society, you know, with our other fellow beings to enhance each other and move forward together and create what we want. And that could be anything. That's a great thing about it. It could be anything. You know, we could laugh every day. We could have an abundance. We could go fishing. We could build stuff, and we could explore what it means to phase in and out. It's just, that's what I want to see. That to me is the ultimate law form.
Yeah. Well, that's my desire and my ultimate too as well. What you're talking about in terms of government is, you know, let's take the United States experiment, supposedly the land of the free. It had to do with what preceded that in terms of the relationship to a crown or a sovereign. And as you've heard me talk about many times, through the esoteric system going back thousands of years from Egypt to Sumeria, Babylon, and so forth, there have always been two primary pillars or two lines: the king who controlled the land and the priest who bound the people to the law. Okay. But then they've created all these religious constructs and supposedly divinely inspired works in terms of books and rules and so forth. But all that really ended up doing is create a multi-generational indoctrinational binding of people being programmed to follow the law of the priest. Okay, and that priesthood has been expanded to the medical priesthood, the legal priesthood, the bureaucratic priesthood of the social workers and the child protection services and everything else that now people blindly follow. And they don't even think about, they're just following. Now we're watching that with the you know, masked zombie apocalypse and all of that. They're just following it without thinking about it, not even thinking about what's real. But the United States experiment took the concept of sovereignty and applied it to the people. Of course, the people at that time of the Constitution, the Declaration and the Articles of Confederation, were the free white land holding males. So it still maintained the continuity. You mentioned the Magna Carta, and going back to the Magna Carta, that people think trial by jury and a jury of my peers means the common people, and it doesn't. It means a peerage. It meant the landed elite who had titles. Those titles were granted by the crown. Okay, so it does get back to law. I mean, to land. And if you do not hold land, if you're not truly a holding an estate with a title, with a beneficial rights attached to the title and the land, then you have no substance in law. You do not have standing in law. So that translated through the creation of the United States. And so the basic structure that's supposed to be in place in the United States was that the people held the sovereign status formerly held by a sovereign crown or a king. They then gave limited delegated sovereign authority to the state. Okay.
Right.
And then the states came together and confederated and then constituted as a structure where there was a federal entity to create a national identity within international political and commercial relationships. But the states were still set up as being a superior sovereign to the federal government, and the people, or the free white landholding males, as the sovereign above the states.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about in government was partially implemented in that structure, in that experiment. Limited delegated authority to a governing government services entity that would provide general services, provide for the general welfare, things like that, provide for the protection of the realm and so forth. But that the people, or those who were considered the qualified people, would still have that sovereign capacity. Well, again, as I was saying, in terms of the law form, how can we translate that to understand the perfection of a system like that without all the fatal flaws that were also built in to create the illusion of freedom, and then invert it so that the federal government that was supposed to be the servant of the states, that in turn was supposed to be the servant of the people, they flipped it over. They flipped it over by all those rules of jurisdiction, admiralty and maritime and bankruptcy and military occupation, and the different things that occurred in the next 200 years. So in order to create a perfected law form, we have to understand how the law form was used, was created as an ideal, and then how it was flipped and used against us.
Yeah.
So that concept of a limited delegated authority vested in a service organization called a government, that's a nice ideal. That's a good idea. But look how it ended up. Okay. They inverted it and they created a centralized hierarchical structure primarily around the system of money and the securitization of that money on the flesh and blood and the possessions of the people. So secondly, when you talk about 1987, as you know, in Gemstone and what we're doing to take what we put together in the last 20 years for status correction in the United States, and now we're translating it to New Zealand and Australia and other Commonwealth countries and Roman civil law countries, that there's a continuity of the history. What followed 1933? What followed 1944 when the UN was created, 1948 when the Bretton Woods set up that agreement that put the FRNs as the reserve currency, as I spoke about earlier. And then what happened in the different jurisdictions that turned a quasi-sovereign nation, New Zealand or Australia, into a corporation, and then monetized that corporation and turned it into a military occupied territory, and then turned it into a bankrupt debtor in possession corporation that bonded the people. So 1987, with that act that you're talking about, what you just described in that act is basically implementing Roman civil law and the rules of usufruct, which is a Roman civil law system, split title, and the system of usage. And usufruct comes from two words, usus and fructus. Fructus means in the fruit, or the fruit of one's labor or creation. Usus means use. Okay, same root as the word usury, which ties back into the money system, and how the use of somebody else's private script, which is what the FRN and the New Zealand dollar and everything else is. We have a limited beneficial use of that script. We have a limited beneficial use of the franchise that has our name on it, created by the birth certificate account and all of that. It doesn't belong to us, but we have a limited beneficial use. That's a split title. Who holds legal title? But more importantly, underneath that is the nature of the underlying estate, because estates are how all property is held on the planet. And so when I talked about landed gentry and the title, the entitlement of a title that's passed generation to generation, that title is held by a living beneficiary called a sesta KV. The life by which the duration of an estate is measured. That's the legal definition of sesta KV. So if I'm the title holder, I'm the Earl or the Baron or the Duke or whatever, I hold that title. I'm the living beneficiary. I'm entitled to the fruit of that estate. So, but I'm still beholden to the sovereign who granted that title and that estate a long time ago to my predecessors, my ancestors, and I'm going to attempt to pass that on to my succeeding generations. That's basically a construct that comes out of Rome, comes out of Roman conquering of Europe and the creating of Roman civil law as a management system for the civil body to own everything, but give them limited rights of use, usufruct, to that which they do not own. Okay.
Yeah.
Without going deeper into the law, what I can definitely tell you, and what you're starting to learn in Gemstone University, is that we have the capacity to claim those estates. And that's the law form that we are implementing through KOD and DaVita, and that will enable us to return to the living, to return to standing as a living beneficiary, but not a sesta KV, because that goes back to an oath of fealty that ties to their crown system, but a true living being with living beneficial rights and equitable interests, that ultimately we are going to collapse those split title trusts and embody those estates in our living being, our living body. There's a lot of steps in between to achieve that, but that's the essence. What people have to understand is that the way the law form up until now has been structured, it does have the remedy. It does have the ability to reclaim that which was lost, to resolve this separation from ourselves, from our landed estates, that is our living body, and from the estate of that which we create, which is the fruit of our creation that has somehow been turned over. And this also gets back to going to peace. Because when you go to peace, you remove yourself from the field of battle. You no longer engage in commerce. You have the power to accept the commercial instruments with charges. And when you do that, you capture, so to speak, the underlying beneficial rights and equitable interests called equity that's embedded in the charges. So you think that there's a tax bill or a charge that you can't do this, or the COVID-19 2020 Act of New Zealand that says if you try to run your restaurant without following our rules, we're going to come and write a lot of hefty fines on you. Okay. Yeah. But those fines are simply charges against the franchise, pulling the equity out of the underlying estate and trying to get you to bind yourself as the trustee in the split title relationship that makes you the liable party to have to perform for the charge, which means pay the fine or do the time. But when you go to peace, you understand how to reverse it and you accept what comes at you. you end up controlling the underlying value, the equity, and you can send it right back to them and say, settle the charge. But you have to know how to do that. That's what I've been learning and perfecting for 30 years. And as I said earlier, I've done it successfully with the IRS, the SEC, and many other situations. And many of the Pantera members who learned this and went through it have done as well. This is what we're migrating into DaVita and the court of the ecclesia and creating an entire world system where the people can claim their estates, resolve the extenuating or outside liabilities and claims, and pretty much go to peace by removing yourself from the field of battle, which means you disconnect from the control matrix system that is sucking your life force.
Yeah. And so everyone watching, it is not a Freemasonic conspiracy. There's no great buddies of mine up in the system and that. I didn't get charged because I know what the hell I'm doing, because I'm part of this, not part of any other law form that everyone's out there studying, pushing, selling, having seminars for. Just this. And here I am, the only one, and all those others who are in the same situation, who got charged, the only one who served the papers, the only one who walked away scot-free. So now you know what the secret is. In New Zealand here, we have a unique situation, a lot of animosity too between those they call Maori. They're not actually Maori, they're people who came at a specific time. They were collectively called Maori, I suppose, because it was by outside they were named. They say they're indigenous here. Well, they're not, because they didn't grow here, therefore they're native. They came in and then bred here. If it was just being born here, then we're all indigenous. They had, unfortunately, they got sucked in twice, actually more than that, but two main times. They did a Declaration of Independence, of which they sent to King William, a letter, a Declaration of Independence. The problem with that is, in order to declare independence, they had to declare independence from something. Well, there was nothing to declare independence from if they were supposedly first here. In that letter, it states that the sovereignty of the Maori nation shall be exercised exclusively through the chiefs and heads of families, or hapu. That cancels everyone else out. You've got your hierarchical structure right there. So they were easy to go and pay off and basically put everyone else under an umbrella. Another one, we shall allow no authority, but that which we create with our own hand, basically, is the essence of it. And that is the law that's there, no outside, in other words, no crown, no nothing like that. Problem is, with their own hand, they vote in Māori elections, the Māori seats, because we've got an apartheid system here. They vote in Māori seats and even in the general election, electoral seats. So by their own hand, they've implemented that law that they say they're against. So that's number two, where they've just destroyed themselves. Even if we don't worry about Article 3 and we go to Article 4, they ask King William to be the parent guardian of their infant state. Therefore, because at no time from that time till this have they actually said, we've come of age, we can now tend to our own affairs, they are completely still in that child-parent relationship. And yet they still walk around with the flag that was gifted to them, state that they're sovereign and under no one else. And they say, Māori are sovereign. I said, you don't get it. Sovereignty cannot reside in a collective. Sovereignty as a concept and a being is individual. Like your sovereignty stops where my body starts. That's how it works.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to get that. So I've kept trying to help them, but boy, is there some attacks. Because I'm white, of course, the system that stuffed them up came wrapped in a white face. So all of a sudden it's racism. It's the whiteys who did it. No, it's the concept that came and got you, and your own greed and inability to stay how you were originally, where you were tenders or caretakers of the land, because that sustained you. They also had land wars here, and I think it was 1867 or something like that. That weren't actually land wars, they were sovereignty wars, because each of these hapus on the land were like their own little micronations, their own sovereign identities. So they fought each other. and to dominate. Some went with the crown soldiers because they had weapons, and we could dominate more and therefore have more. And others stayed true to themselves. We're pacifists, so we're not going to do anything. Most of them got wiped out. So that was a silly idea too. And then came the 1840 came the Titiritia Waitangi. Now, how that's written in the Maori text and how it translates properly into English is great. The problem is, in 1975, with the Treaty of Waitangi Act, the guy by the name of MP by the name of Maturata put in a completely bullshit document that he called the Treaty of Waitangi, or was labeled as the Treaty of Waitangi. And everyone knows if you get the Maori text of the treaty and you translate it properly and fairly, it comes out to what was found later now in the archives called the Littlewood Treaty. That was the final draft. Because the staple holes, forensics all line up. That's a fact. But the fake one they've been pushing all this time gives Maori a forever claim. They can claim for everything. But here's the problem. There was such a thing as like these are all settlements. In other words, they've gone to this people they've complained about being thefts of land. And to me, I said they didn't thieve the land at all. They've never stolen land. They have removed your beneficial use of it, your ability to be sustained by the land. That's where the crime took place. They didn't dig up the land, put it in their pocket, and piss off overseas. So they've never stole land. The whole concept of stealing land is ridiculous. It's to remove the use of or block the use of. So because the creation of an iwi, and that's like basically, okay, that whole region up there is Ngāpui, that whole region down there is Ngaitahu, that whole region over there is Tainui, etc., etc. They had a few what we call the plastic Maori, being them over, they got made in China stamped on their ass. They bought and paid for them. And because of the corporate iwi creation instead of the whānau hapu, which is a natural thing, they have been settling claims for all the underlings in their mind, because it goes back to the concept, chiefs and heads of hapu, not the rest of the people. And they've been settling these claims, and therefore by way of settlement, it's been reversed. They've legalized the theft, and basically through their signatures, and that said, yes, it's okay for you now to control everything and tell us what to do. They give some land back, and they give them dual use or dual management of parks and estates and stuff like that. But again, you got to look at the board. The board is all the same type of species, we'll call them, because they're creatures. They're not even bloody man. They're creatures. And these people have been sucking the lifeblood out of their own people. When you get billions and billions of dollars in settlement, and you've got the people who are starving, they can't get houses, can't do this, can't do that. There's something seriously wrong, and they're working with the other side. So how do we get them to see that by trying to say, they call it he whakaputanga, or Declaration of Independence, and this flag that was gifted to them, which was a trading flag to stop the ships getting boarded overseas, of course, by privateers. And you talk about licenses, exemption to do something that would otherwise be deemed illegal. Same thing.
It's a letter of marque and reprisal.
Yeah, you're not allowed to be a pirate on the water, but be a privateer. Here's the crown grant, and you can go and pillage all you want. Just don't take our shit. And that's basically all it's about. Well, they've done it here as well with Maori. Well, with I don't know what to call them, with other people who came in a collective here. And then our history has been lied about. The whole thing's, it's just a dog's breakfast over here. But how do we impress on them that their whole position they are taking is completely and utterly fruitless, invalid, and for almost 200 years, they've been trying the same thing, and it's never changed. They've never benefited. They've only had the elites profit, and the rest of the Maori get absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, it's the same over here too, and it's the same technique of this consciousness that we're dealing with here to use every modality available, lie, cheat, manipulate, divide and conquer, all of those things.
Yeah. That's all been employed.
Either bribe or pay off or threaten or blackmail, all of those things. So the ones who are weak of spirit and lacking in being, who will step up and sell their brothers down the river for their own benefit, it doesn't matter what kind of body that they're in, black, white, yellow, green. It's what's inside that body that's willing to align with this program, and we have to expand the time frame and the reality that we're dealing with beings who have been contracted to this, what we call the cabal, or whatever we want to call it, for thousands of lifetimes, thousands and millions of years. The beings who have incarnated into these original people, the indigenous people, who then step up and create the same hierarchical structure and just reproduce it for self-aggrandizement and benefit, you'll know them by, as the saying goes, by their acts and deeds, not by who they say they are, and not by the color of their skin. Same thing happens here with the licensing to have casinos. So the reservations are considered sovereign territory, and the tribe can create its own law. It has its own police, its own governing body, and it can create in its law that we can have a casino here. Well, in order to create these casinos, they have to contract basically with the legal mafia and the government. But then again, I repeat myself, and because they know how to run and create these casinos. There's lots of stories over here of tribal casinos that are making millions and millions of dollars, while the few on the top are taking all of it and the rest of the tribe is starving, or they're the servants and the employees at the casino and just getting a day wage, and that's it. So it's the same formula. In answer to your question, like I said earlier, I'm not here for myself to save this world or save anybody. I'm here to express my being and use my intelligence to do what I am working with others to do and create models and templates. And those who really align with it have the affinity to what we're doing, true mutual benefit and true balance and equity within our relationships and within our social society structures. Those are the beings that are coming to us. And as you're starting to know with your few months of being a member of Pantera, we've had to deal with lots of people over the years who show up and say, yeah, I'm all for it. And they speak the language, but they turn into, demonic forces, and they attack us and become belligerent. So we have to build our discernment and our ability to set our boundaries, set our structures, and come together as communities to manage and sustain that, and know who really is there for building their own sovereign integrity, but understanding what sovereign integrity means. A living being is a whole system, which is self-responsible, self-governing, self-correcting, and self-directing, self-organizing, and other elements that constitute what real sovereignty is. So that's what we mean by sovereign integrity, the completeness of a whole system as a microcosm of the greater whole. We are a living universe. It's mutually reflective of a larger system, a larger universe, but universes in the galactic sense of things, in the cosmos, don't do what humans, in the way you've described it, do. That's part of the disease that we're slowly cleansing from this body politic of the world system. And so we have to learn what sovereign integrity means. Well, we have to learn what being self-responsible, self-governing, and all the rest of it is, learning to reconnect to our source connection so that we are not living in fear and survival and lack and limitation, so that we don't have to lie, cheat, and steal to take from somebody else, because we have the capacity to create. And then within our living universe, when we choose to contract with another living universe, another living being, we come together in a consensus, which is called contract. Okay, that's why all law is fundamentally contract. If we're free sovereign will beings, having sovereign free will, and we're in a universe that's hardwired on that fundamental basis, then the only way two or more beings come together is by consensus, by agreement, by creating a consensus reality by contractual agreement, meeting all the component parts of a valid contract, meeting of the minds, full disclosure, mutual benefit or mutual consideration, and all of that. And and that's where the re-education of this whole world population has to start, because most are programmed in the matrix reality thinking of what's in it for me, how can I manipulate, how can I lie, cheat, and steal to get what I want, and it starts in the crib. Well, if you learn how to manipulate your mom or your dad or your nanny to get what you want, then you grow up into an adult or an adult body, still with an infant consciousness that's just going to use manipulation tools to get what one wants.
And it's funny how they fast learn to spell like dad as ATM.
Yeah. But when you talk about this, declaration of sovereignty, and they have made an outside force or power a guardian. Well, that's our relationship with this nanny state. We're in a guardian ward relationship. People talk about the birth certificate, but they don't understand what actually happens in the mechanics. When the registration of the birth converts a live birth record into a birth certificate or a record of vital statistic by the mother or the father, in some cases being the informant in the registration forms, the mother here in the US, I think the UK is the father, but by and large, it's the mother who is informing, which means putting the newborn into form, removing from substance of the living being, putting him into the shell of the form to register under the royal registry and become a foundling and a ward of the state. Well, when you're a ward of the state becomes your guardian. So for these people, and see, this is one of the biggest problems that I've watched for 30 years, because I've interacted many, many times with a lot of original people, Hawaiians, Native Americans, now more and more with Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere, like in Africa. And people are just learning about what they think law is. And then they start trying to assert sovereignty and, indigenous rights and declaration of status and self-determination, but they don't really understand it comprehensively. And then they do things that just take them right from the frying pan into the fire. And
that's why they fund both sides of every war. If they feel any sort of discontent in a nation, they will go and fan that, won't they? And then they will build them up and then have them at war again. And it's all about making sure they're always fighting. Because when you're fighting someone, you're not talking to them. Therefore, you're not finding common ground.
Divide and conquer. So, back to, I wanted to finish with the 1987 Act, that as you described it, it immediately told me that somewhere around that time, preceding that year in that act, that New Zealand was converted to a full liquidated, foreclosed, bankrupt corporation, so that then the larger global system could come in and force the parliament to start passing acts to change the fundamental relationship of the people to becoming only basically landless servants who are bonded sureties to the bankrupt franchise, all property belonging to the state through the franchises, and the limited use relationship of usufruct, giving beneficial use, but not true title. And so that act that you described set that up, or implemented it, and turned it into a statutory rule within that system. So that's a big clue to go back and look at that, look at what happened just preceding that in New Zealand's relationship, primarily through the money system. When did New Zealand get converted to a liquidated bankrupt?
I think we were originally bankrupted, I think, in 1934, a year after the US. I think that in 1986, that was when we went full corporate. That's where they got rid of everything to do with England and become their own standalone corporate under Her Majesty the Right Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand. That was the corporate name.
But
That was the
see,
one on the
that's
securities.
and that's a corporation, and it's registered. I would imagine there's something called the Companies House in the City of London. If you were
and
to
it's
take
actually
that,
it was on the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission as Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand. The last filing they had, however, was 2016, I believe. That was the last filing. So around 2016, something's happened, and they've either created another vehicle that they've put it under, because they've been trying to change the flag. They've been trying to, well, that didn't work. They've been trying to create change the name New Zealand to Aotearoa, and this country's never been known as Aotearoa. Simple as that. It was just a new thing. It was because even in documents, it was called Nuterini, in official documents that Maori signed and all that. So everything is changing. They're bringing 3 waters in, significant natural areas. The Great Reset is definitely happening here. We are the vanguard for that. Vanguard and BlackRock, funny that.
Yeah. But what you have to understand, I think you know this, but for the people watching, is that's all well and good. Again, it all was channeled through the United States, and the 3 periods of 70 years international bankruptcy that ended in 1999. That was supposed to be the full liquidation to capture the people and the property, convert them into artificial juridic persons, U.S. citizens, subjects under the U.S. jurisdiction worldwide, and all of the creation of the corporate form of the different countries turned into nations, turned into corporations, turned into bankruptcies, turned into liquidated bankrupt debtors through the United States. But what has been happening that people don't know about, they are going to learn about very soon, is that the United States, as the master corporation, has been fully liquidated, and it has reverted to the creditors, which are the people. Okay, so I want people to understand that no matter what you think you know about all the problems and all the history, and they did this, they did that, they did this, blah, 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 all the stuff that I've studied and mastered the understanding of for 30 years, and you're all moving into that integrated mastery of seeing the historical timeline, it's all irrelevant now. It has been completely liquidated. It's about to be completely shifted, and all those corporate people who were acting, see, all of it's under the rules of limited liability. Okay, this goes back to acts in the U.S. in the 1850s. In limited liability, an office holder must be bonded. They are bonded to protect the man or the woman behind the office. If they perform the duties of the office properly according to the rules and the laws, they're protected behind limited liability. But if they do criminal acts that strip away that limited liability protection, and they are no longer bonded by an insurance mechanism to indemnify them, which means hold them harmless from commercial liability, they no longer have limited liability protection. So when I said before that all these office holders, all these things that you're seeing as crimes, which they are, by Scott Morrison and Daniel Andrews and Jacinda and all the rest of them around the world, they all have gone beyond the protection of that limited liability, and they will be held accountable. But we don't have to do that. The mechanism for that is now already in place. Okay. So that's where we go to that phrase that I quote, let the dead tend to the dead. Okay. Yep. They're in the cult of death. They act in dead personas, but the mechanisms of justice, if you will, real justice, are finally already arrived in full circle. They will face the consequences of what they've done, and quite seriously. So
I volunteered to take a sneak peek into their matrix and hold the sniper's rifle to end their participation in this realm after they found of not being on the right playing field. And then, of course, I'll come back and be peaceful again. Like I said, baby steps for me. Baby steps for me.
Okay.
Still getting there. But yeah, we've got... See, this conversation, I suppose, is probably tied up a whole lot of loose ends for people. They're in all, and it's probably opened up a few more, because I know the religious people will say, you know what you're talking about? Jesus is real. He's coming to save us. I say to them, how's he done so far? Done 2/10. It's not much, you know. I don't. To me, faith is if they use faith as a way to strengthen them to carry on, all power to them. I'm happy about that. What I don't like is shirking your responsibility outside yourself and blaming everyone and everything around you for the reason you are where you are, which I'm guilty of at times. You know, it's a hard thing to sort of put the mirror up to yourself and self-examine. That's been bloody hard, as you know, by some of the documents that we talk through. But I think if it gets met by some with anger, that's a good thing, because that's a ping to their conscience. They know something's wrong. They know that they're the end all and be all. I've always said the commandments in the Bible, the 10 commandments, only make sense when you stand in front of a mirror and you recite them. You're telling yourself. It's a reminder to you not to do these things. It's almost like there's a movie out where a guy has written notes to himself because he knows he's going to have amnesia when he wakes up, and he has to decode it in time before he slips out again in order to achieve something. And it's like, we're doing that.
That's what we did a long time ago. Yeah. And so what people, when you're speaking of the, you know, stronger fundamental approach to the Bible and everything that's in it, have to understand that this is a massively encoded, but also a massively manipulated document. And one of the fundamental tools of that, both encodement and manipulation, is the fundamental constructs of language. Okay. So those books and documents have gone through metamorphosis linguistically at least a dozen times. So where it started and what it was actually brought into being in a written form thousands of years ago, and what it metamorphosed to many successive phases, has nothing, well, I wouldn't say nothing, is not what you think it is. I wouldn't say it has nothing to do with what you believe. And I always say to people, find, you know, return to the center of your own heart and the faith that you have in a sense of moral agency and ethical principles and so forth. But drop this whole thing about an external savior that's going to come to save you, because it's completely constructed by the Roman Church for its purposes. And it's pretty self-evident, if you want to look for it, who the Roman Church is working for. And it ain't the God that you think you are aligning with. And if you say, well, I'm not a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, guess what? That was all manipulated and constructed quite precisely right around this time that led to, you know, the last 400 years and the next, and more or less the final iteration of that linguistic metamorphosis, turning it into a mind control program. So the essence of what you feel is real, and I won't say that's inappropriate or so forth. And so that's why I can work with the construct of the Davidic line and the House of David and Kingdom of David and so forth, because I've been working with David for 2.5 years now, and I've assisted him in seeing much deeper into those deeper esoteric layers of the things that he took more literally during the early part of his life. And he's gone through a personal transformation and understands things in a much greater, expanded way. And what we're doing is we're decoding those messages we left ourselves a long time ago. Like you said, you know, like in a movie, you go to sleep because you know you're not going to remember in the morning. there's that movie 50 Dates, which was a funny movie, but it was that kind of story. This couple who came together and they didn't remember themselves the next day. So we did
Groundhog Day, all that.
Yeah, we did that. We wrote encoded messages to remember and wake ourselves up during this time. So try to expand letting go of what you think is real in those relationships that were turned upside down. Just like the US system started with at least a limited part of the population as sovereign living people and inverted it to become hierarchical and centralized. The same thing happened with religion. And you can discover what's really underneath it if you just are willing to let go of the things you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. That was, that's going to be a bit to digest for people. I know someone in particular that has talked to me about it, raised from a young age, father is a priest or pastor, been indoctrinated with that, and has sort of hasn't dismissed it out of hand, and it keeps rewinding it and watching different parts and listening, going away thinking about it, saying no, coming back, arguing with the self, but becoming more aware. It's actually really good to see that people are so steeped in their own idea or idealism, managing to now open up and bring something else in that could cause a paradigm shift, which is great. So I want to thank you for your time, Ken. I know you've got a course coming in soon, and there's other things that are happening on the in the foreground. So we will look forward to the next show. And ladies and gentlemen, that is Kenneth Scott of the House of Cousins. Go and check out proclamationofpeace.org. You can see them also on counterspinmedia.com. Have a look at Gemstone University on YouTube. Well and truly worth watching everything. For those in New Zealand, kodfreedom.co.nz.com. Have a look at that. And
get together with Kelvyn and the other people who are very active now in New Zealand with the things we mentioned earlier that we're starting to build. Come together, because the power of your community to stand, instead of what I said last time, just go in your house, close the door, and just let it. No, come out of your house, find your like-minded, like-spirited community, and come together and do the work that's necessary. And that very flimsy veneer of a matrix control system, you'll start punching big holes in it. And there's other things, as I've said, very soon.
Yep.
So you've got to come together.
Definitely. We definitely are. We're metaphorically kicking ass and taking names. And remember, people, we're not here to teach you what you don't already know. We're just here to help you remember what you forgot. And that is you. So thanks, Ken. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you all on the next show.
Very good. Thanks a lot.
You can find Counterspin, New Zealand's media revolution, at counterspinmedia.com. And now, on the InfoWars Network at band.video.